Tim.
Yes.
What's your topic?
I want to talk about 9/11.
Oh, an uplifting one. Okay.
Where were you when 9/11 happened? Again, I feel like we've had that discussion in some way
It's popped
on
up
the
here
show
or there.
before, but I don't think we've all talked about it as a topic of where we were. Nick.
I distinctly remember that because it was the first day I was supposed to start interning on Paramount Pictures lot. And so I didn't, this was before obviously like cell phones were really, really prevalent. Like I didn't have the person's, like my boss's number on her, like her cell phone number. And I didn't really know how to get in touch with them. And I was like, I have to go. Like I'm living in Orange County at the time. And this is what I'm thinking in my brain is like, this could be the start of my career if I show up for these people. But then I'm watching this horrible thing unfold on the news. And I'm like, knowing in the front of my mind, everything's closed. Like this is not a normal day. This is just going to be a terrible thing, and everyone needs to stay in, like be here for each other. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, what if on some odd chance, because this is film production, that they're like, we have this big thing that's happening, and Nick, we needed you to go do this thing, and you didn't show up. Like you're not going to get this internship. So I got in my car and drove from Orange County all the way to Melrose Avenue in LA, and pulled up to the gate, and I was like, look, I know that you're probably not. And the guy's like, turn around and leave, like just go. And I'm like, thank you. I just needed you to tell me that, so that on the odd chance that like, you know, they were like, where the fuck were you? Like, and of course they were like, of course, no one's working this week. Like I think the lot was closed for like an entire week. But I'll never forget that, because I was like, this is what I was so fucking excited that morning when I woke up, and I was so excited. And this is like obviously pre-smartphones, so you're not seeing a shit ton of text messages coming through about what's going on. No one's
I like that we have
me.
to explain that to our younger viewers.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like you didn't know until I didn't know until I walked out and saw my friend who was in grad school at the time watching the news and was like, just was silent. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? That's crazy. Like I thought it was a TV show. I'm like, what's going on? And all of a sudden I'm like, this is a real thing that's happening right now. And then getting in my car and driving and seeing the LA freeways like not as busy as they normally are. And then like looking up, you remember that whole week you just looked up and there was like not a plane in the sky. It was fucking weird. It was horrible.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes at a definitive moment. I've, left home for the first time. I'm 18. It's my freshman year of Mizzou, and I've been there all of 2.5-3 weeks. And the weekend before, to give context to the Greg Miller timeline of how early this is, the week, it's Tuesday, September 11th. So September 8th was the Mizzou game for football. That was the family day or whatever. So my mom and dad had flown into the Columbia Airport from Chicago to come to do that. It was the first time I ever went to an Antler tailgate. I wasn't a member at all. I was a prospective, recruit or whatever, and went there and drank with them just a little, and had brought a little bottle of Scope mouthwash that after I drank a little bit, we were playing kickball and I swished it out and spit it out, and somebody started shit on me, and an older guy was like, no, he's going to meet his parents. It's fine. You know what I mean? I was like, I like this group. And so then went to the game, blah, blah, blah. And like, that was like this last slice of normalcy. And then it was, I'm in the dorms for freshman year. I had watched Monday Night Raw in my room, as I always did or whatever, and went to bed. And I had American history as my first class that day. And it was a later class. I want to say like 11 or something to that effect. And so my roommate, who I didn't know, was just I got paired up with through Mizzou or whatever. I heard him get up, and when he opened the door, there was just commotion in the hallway. And he stepped out and half closed the door behind him and was talking to other people. Mm-hmm. And what I thought I heard him say or somebody in the hallway say, the second floor balcony just collapsed. When in reality, they're saying the second tower just collapsed, or the south tower just collapsed. And so I heard that, and our dorm was the first floor, and you could see the balconies from the window in the dorm room. And so I briefly thought about getting up and going to look, and I was like, no, it'll be on the news tomorrow. And so rolled back over, and then like I had enough time to process that thought, and then the door flew open, and it was him coming back in. And he was like, Greg, you got to get up. You got to get up. And I was like, the first thing I said is like, oh, are we on TV? Thinking that like the local news would be out there covering this balcony collapse at the dorm or whatever. And he turned on the TV, and it was a Missy Elliott video on MTV that hadn't been interrupted yet. It was some dumb thing, and then it was the news. Yeah. And then I started getting brought up, and like it was so. And I'm sure for you and Colin, I imagine you were living it more moment to moment. It was so hard to process what you were seeing, because a plane has hit the World Trade Center. Okay. 2 planes have hit at World Trade Center. I'm like, was it on camera? And they're like, yeah, there's video of this live happening. I'm like, are they? You're like, they're single engine Cessnas? No, they're big planes. Like, what do you? Okay, and then for me, like, this is another thing I think that's funny, interesting, however you want to put it, but like, I think when you talk about how this changes America and the perception of everything, I was like, all right, cool. And what exactly is the World Trade Center? Because for me, I distinctly remember the World Trade Center bombing, the original one. But for me as a kid watching that on Fox Thing in the morning on the local Chicago news, it was a shot up at one of the towers with smoke coming out and people exiting. And then I even remember the Simpsons episode where Homer's car gets parked at the World Trade Center. And for me, the World Trade Center wasn't the towers. I assumed it was like similar to McCormick Place in Chicago, which is a very dated reference or whatever of it's a collection of buildings. It is this center. And when people are like, no, this is what it is. This is what it is. Trying to wrap your head around that, get up to speed. By the time I had been up, one of the towers had already collapsed. I forget if it was, Brokaw, it must have been Brokaw, right? He was one of the ones going live at the time, talking about the North Tower was now leaning. They thought that was going to come down, and like sitting there, and it was such a weird thing of sitting there. I'm 18. I just started this life of independence, and now you're there, and you're like, the world's going to change. And I remember being wrapped up in this blanket that I'd taken to Mizzou with me. That was my parents' comforter. That became the comforter that was in the RV we had forever, and then I took college because it meant so much to me. And being wrapped up in that, and my mom calling on the phone in the room, I didn't have a cell phone, the cordless phone we have in the room, and being just like, so you're seeing all this, right? Are you okay? Are you scared? I'm like, well, I'm fine. What's going on? You're in Chicago. She's like, well, there's fighter jets now over here. Everything's been shut off. They're worried about the Sears Tower, but they don't think anything's gonna happen. I'm like, oh, gee, you know what I mean? And it was just this weird, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, that was the thing of rocking just what was normal forever. And the fact that you brought it up today. Like we've talked about this in passing. There's been a conversation with Colin about it. We've obviously had conversations, but never something in depth as a topic. And it sounds so weird, but I've always said that I'm fascinated with 9/11 because it is, I guess, my Kennedy assassination. I remember my mom talking about that when I was young. Of like, she remembered everything about that day. She was in grade school or whatever. Her teachers coming in, the librarian stopping the class to explain what's happening. And like, she's like, you're gonna have that one day, and I can't tell you what it is or where, blah blah blah, but it's going to happen. And the way I think. I was talking about how much I miss Mizzou and how much I miss Columbia and how, honestly, those years in Columbia feel like they were 2 years ago. And when I sit here and talk about the fact, like, oh shit, I graduated in 2005. You know what I mean? It's been 12 years since I walked. Like, that doesn't feel like that. And I think a big part of it is the fact that, cool, I'm on my own and bam, everything's going to be different. You know what I mean? I talk about it where I was sitting there watching it and I left my door open. I used to always leave my door open so people would come in and I'd meet new people. And to this day, I'm not sure if it was real or fake. I assume it was real. But a guy and a girl were coming down the hall, and she lived in the dorm, and he was visiting, and he came in, and he was watching, and she went out to go call her family, and he was like, hey, I am in the Army Reserves or something to that effect. I don't know, because everything's happening. I'm like, okay. He's like, can I use your phone? And I'm like, yeah. And he picked up the phone, he dialed the number, and he said, this is whoever, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then he gave like Alpha Bravo, that kind of like thing or whatever. And he's like, okay. And he hung up, and he's like, all right, I got to go. Like, they're rallying us. He's like, there's bombs the media don't even know about, which today sounds like such bullshit, but in that moment, nobody knew what the fuck was going on. You watch anything, you read the oral history of 9/11 that they put out recently, I think the last anniversary or whatever, like from the president's side, and like you're like, oh fuck, maybe that could have been a real thought that everybody had. And going through that day, I went to that American history class, and it was the same thing where 15% of the class had shown up. One girl was weeping in the front row. Another girl was telling me she had read some Tom Clancy book, and this is how World War III starts. And the professor came in, and he was just in like street clothes. He's like, go home. You are living history right now. You cannot, there's no reason for you to be here. So we went and did that. And then I went to a French class hours later. And the French class was the exact opposite of like, we're not going to talk about it. Everybody, we're going to do this. We're going to try to learn French. Yeah. Like, okay, great. Then that's going to stick real well today. And then for me, I could talk forever about it, but the epilogue to it really was when I was like, all right, cool. Like, is this going to be the moment where everything's different in my life and the world I know, or will it one day go back to normal? And there was perfect snapshots for me of before and after where there's this whiteboard in our dorm, and when you'd walk in, the CAs would write on the board what's like, this is what's happening in the dining hall, and this is Mizzou football tonight and free tiger stripe for freshmen, and like all those dumb shit or whatever. And then I remember coming in like a week and a half later, and you walk in, and it was just updates, of course, of what's happening, and then like about 9/11, about what's happening, and what Bush said, and then you came in one day, and it was just like. Again, I think it was Tom Brokaw, right? Had anthrax sent to his office or whatever, and they've evacuated, and it's just like. Nope, we're never going back. This is it now.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to get up. My throat was really scratchy.
That's okay.
Got a cough attack.
You're fine.
Call.
I was a senior in high school, and I had broken my collarbone a few days before.
Where were you?
Long Island. God, yeah. So I went to school early. That normal, ridiculously early start for high school, and I don't remember when I found out, but I remember being in Mr. Morazzo's astronomy class. Astronomy was kind of like this throwaway science class that seniors did. We could do ornithology and astronomy. I took both of them because they were just like jokes.
Why not?
And I remember this was again to kind of ground younger people. Like I had a cell phone actually at the time, but no one was text messaging. No one sent text messages in 2001, and we didn't have like TVs in the classroom. We had the internet and stuff like that, but no, it wasn't like, in other words, it wasn't like this multimedia kind of situation. I think that schools are probably today. So we were kind of just like kind of in the dark and trying to be normal. And I remember Mr. Morazzo saying that he thought it was something to do with Iraq and how this could be the start of a war or whatever. Which I being somewhat familiar with history at that point in my life, I was like, seems like a Pearl Harbor like attack, and we certainly don't have an enemy like the Japanese or the Nazis to deal with. I mean, we can wipe these people out, but certainly this is going to be the start of a war, and it was. It had more of the vibe of like the USS Maine and stuff like that in the Spanish-American War and stuff like this, like kind of sabotage, as opposed to like this overt military attack like Pearl Harbor was. And I remember that was like fourth or fifth period, and I remember leaving after that. And I actually just walked home to go see my dad. And
You weren't dismissed. You just left.
No, I just left, and no one stopped me. Like no one. I mean, I think everyone was just leaving. I was like, I'd like to see you try to stop me, because what I was most curious about was what my dad thought, because my dad, New York City firefighter, but on light duty at that time. My dad had fallen in a fire in the late '90s and burned his hands really bad. So he had like a bunch of surgeries on his hands and was basically withdrawn from actively fighting fires at that point. So I was like, he must be home, and I wonder what the fuck's going on. I was still nebulous. I hadn't really even turned the TV on. I knew the towers had fallen. You don't really understand the gravity, what's going on, how many people are killed, the firefighters and the first responders, whatever. And I get home and I find a note from my dad, and it says like, I'm going into the city, and I think it said something like Tommy's missing. Tommy was my dad's best friend, again, my dad didn't have a cell phone, I don't think, at this time. And I think I did. My mom bought me my first cell phone. Long story short, my dad did not come home that entire day. We didn't hear from him. We didn't know what the fuck was going on. Like, we knew that like all my dad's shit was gone. Like, he had like his boots and his coat and his helmet and stuff. Like, they have that stuff at the firehouse, but he also has that stuff at home. And I knew where that stuff was, and I went and looked, and they were gone. So I was like, great. And but the towers are already fallen, so I was like, I think he's probably all right, but who the fuck knows what's going on in New York City? I won't tell the full story about like how my dad got into the city, which was a fucking feat within itself, and what happened. The stories are insane, and I think we should maybe save that for a exclusive for GameOverGreggy or whatever. Like, my dad, like, that was an insane. I can't even imagine. Like, my dad's stories from out there are fucking nuts, and the days after, of course, too. But what ended up happening was that everyone that was on duty at my dad's firehouse died in the collapse. My dad's firehouse was in Brooklyn. For people that don't know the geography of New York, Battery Park is in the lower part of Manhattan. Brooklyn Bridge goes over towards that area, like towards center, and then down towards that area. So like everything was clogged going downtown in Manhattan. So firehouses in Midtown and in Uptown had a really hard time getting there, but firehouses in lower Manhattan and then firehouses in Brooklyn were able to get over the bridge and get in there. So while lots of firehouses lost lots of people, the firehouses that got there first were wiped the fuck out. They were all dead. Over 300 firemen died.
For uninformed like myself, how many people are in a firehouse? Roughly.
I want to say 12 are on duty at a time. So I want to say maybe 24, 20, 24, something like that. I think it probably also varies. But I'm trying to think of my dad's firehouse, which was in East New York, which is a really bad part of New York City. And how many of them were there. And I want to say there was probably 20 of them or something like that. But I don't know. They share beds and stuff. Like, you're not supposed to be there at the same time. And so my dad ended up being in the city, and my mom comes down from Boston. My brother's living for a little while at my grandma's on Long Island because he's working at a job in New York. So he comes over, and my sister Allie's also home. And I remember just watching the news with them. At some point, I don't remember exactly. I can't believe I don't remember like more specifics. At some point, my dad comes home, and I think he's carrying his helmet. I think he dropped his coat in the garage, dropped his helmet on the kitchen floor, and then just walked into his bedroom. And didn't say like anything to anyone. And that helmet is covered with asbestos and like dust and all that shit and it hangs in his office to this day. Never wiped it off. So I think for 9/11, like the gravity of that day, I think is just far deeper for not only like, and I because it's not a territorial kind of thing, but you just can't quite understand what it's like. There's depths of it. Like we're all American. Then there's a few of us that are New Yorkers, and there's a few of us that really knew what the fuck went down that day in terms of losing people. And like the fact is that like lots of people that we knew died. Like it wasn't like one or two. And my dad was at funerals constantly. And Tommy, his best friend, died after all. And if you ever see me wear my FDNY shirts that I wear sometimes, it says TK for Tommy Kavekis on the shoulder or on the arms. You can get one for any of the guys that died for the ladder company. And he was the last one buried in May, I think, of 2002 because they'd never found his body. And I've told the story about that funeral was awful, just absolutely haunting. It was on Long Island. I think it was in Garden City. And my dad was one of the pallbearers, and it was a really traumatic thing, but it was also a lot of closure because that was the last one.
Yeah.
But what I do remember, as I've said in the past, is that Tommy had a daughter who was my age. And I remember seeing her and giving my condolences or whatever to her, but also in my mind being like,
yeah,
this could have been me. You know, like if my dad, what we say in my family is if my dad didn't get hurt in the late 90s in a very traumatic way. I mean, my dad really hurt himself or got hurt falling in a fire, as I said. Decent chance my dad would have died that day. So like a better than likely chance that my dad would be dead.
That's
so
crazy.
It's very traumatic that day. And I respect that it all kind of brought everyone together. And I think people they understand like there is an extra level of melancholy for that day for people like me. And it goes even deeper than mine. Like when you have a dad who died or
fiance, anything like that. Yeah.
It's like, but like I knew like these were friends of the family. These were people I knew. You know, there's pictures of Tommy holding me. There's like all like. So it was really, really, really dark and dire. And what I remember in the months after that was I've never seen. New York's a very liberal place. Long Island isn't, and upstate isn't, but New York City is pretty liberal, and that kind of vibes out to the rest of the state because there's so many people there. And the hawkishness of New York after that was something I have never seen in my entire life. Like. And I've said in the past, and I know a lot of people might not remember, I think about this time a lot, the amount of restraint that actually was shown after 9/11 by the United States for like that what was just a dastardly, like cowardly attack is actually extraordinary. Bush could have gotten away with doing much worse than he did. And in the 6 months or so after the 9/11 era, it would have been like, you know, it wasn't until like the ball really started getting rolling after Afghanistan and Iraq when things started to really fall apart. And I understand that, but I always kind of respected the restraint and the leadership that man showed. I know a lot of people give him a lot of shit for kind of sitting in the classroom and all that kind of stuff, but like you don't know what the weight of that is, and you don't know like what was being told for him and what are you going to do? Like the fighters are scrambling, like we don't know if there are planes in the air and stuff. Yeah. So in other words, I was in 12th grade. I was in an astronomy class, and it was a terrible day, and that haunts the Moriarty family to this day. And I've told stories about, my father is 6'3" and the anti-Colin, really like very buff and healthy and eats well and, works out and does all that kind of stuff. And I've had instances with my father where, in years past and years since, especially like in a couple years after that, where, you can see that even these grown, very strong men, are haunted by that day that were there, that the things he's seen. And I'm not going to tell his stories. I'd like for him to tell his story one day on GameOverGreggy, because it's really violent, fucked up shit. And he, like the people, like the state of the corpses being pulled out of the rubble. I won't even get into, like, it's insane. It's fucking insane. Like the stories that these men have. And my dad was going to grad school at the time, since he was hurt and kind of on the route to retirement or whatever it was. And still works for the FDNY today. I mean, he's a social worker. He has his master's degree, social worker, working specifically with families that lost people and firemen that were there, because he was there. So it's not like someone saying, I know how you feel. He's like, I actually do know how you feel because I was actually there. And also, I think maybe I didn't tell this story. I remember going to a Yankee game with my dad the season after. So it must have been 2002, the summer of 2002. And we were in the Bronx, not a very nice part of the city. And we were walking back to the car after the game, and a rat ran across. And my dad kind of like startled back. And I was like, you fucking kidding me? And I remember him in one of the most vehement ways he's ever said anything to me, because my dad's not a yeller. My dad's not a physical man at all. Never put his hands on me, but like kind of did like one of these, like grab my arm, and he's like, that reminds me of 9/11, and just walk and continue to walk, like left me behind, whatever,
shit.
Yeah. And I was like, all right. So yeah, you can watch the conversation with Colin if you want more on that, but.
You gotta do that one-on-one.
Yeah, I think it would be really good. I've always wanted to tell his story, and I don't want to tell, because it's so incredible, like how he even got into the city, because everything was shut down. It's a really incredible story. But thank God he hurt himself, or he would be gone. So, yeah.
Tim, you were super young.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing for me is I was 11, and 11 is that perfect age where like I hadn't even gone through puberty yet at that time. Like it was right around the corner, but. I was a little boy, and I remember waking up. I was in the shower getting ready I was in middle school at the time. My brother was in elementary school, and I was in the shower waiting, and my mom like bust the door open. I got hella mad at her. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, stop exploring my sexuality. Yeah, exactly. And she's just like, New York's been attacked. And I was just kind of like, okay. Like that meant nothing to me.
Sure.
Sure. I'm like, don't know what that means. New York might as well be Australia.
Sure.
Like, because keep in mind, at that point, I've never traveled outside of, like, the farthest I went was Lake Tahoe, which is like 3 hours from here.
Sure.
Right. So like the world felt like an enormous place. And I'm like, New York, I don't even know where the fuck that is. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, leave me alone. I'm in the shower. And then I remember getting out of the shower. My mom was just like, yeah, you're not going to school. Like, I don't care what they say. You're not going to school. And I was like, what is your deal? Like this, come on. And then I remember just walking downstairs, and like everyone was outside, and they're like, no, we're not, there's no school. Like no one's going to school. And my brother like, all right, I guess. And then all the like neighborhood kids, like my mom still had to go to work. My mom worked at a hospital. So there was like certain places where it was like, she was telecommunications. So it was like, she was one of the few jobs that was like, all right, this is necessary. And I remember, so it was just me and my brother, and we went kind of gathered all the neighborhood kids around our age group, and we're all just hanging out. None of us had any idea about the scope of what was going on. And like all the adults were tripping balls, but like none of them were explaining it in a way that made sense. So we're like, all right, cool. I guess we're just going to play Smash Bros. And like, we just N64 Smash Bros. Was played for hours and hours and hours. And then there was whatever, we moved from house to house to house. And it just it went from like the adults being really confused, not knowing what's going on, to the next adults being really upset and like scared sounding. And like, we kept getting kicked out of houses. Like it reached a point where they're just like, oh no, like, you guys need to go. You guys need to go. And so we just kept moving from house to house to house. I remember it was like the fifth house we got to, where they're like, stop playing, like look at the TV. And we were like, started looking at it, and we just see a plane crash into a fucking building. We're like, holy shit, like this doesn't seem real. Like, and like, this is real. This is happening right now. And then live, we saw the second thing happen, and it was just like, holy shit, like we were actually being attacked. Like this is a real thing. And it wasn't, and this is something so many people say, but like, I will never forget. It was like, those are people falling out of the little black things falling are people. And that's when everything got really real. And it was like, oh fuck. And then that's when the fear started. Cause that's when it went from everyone just being like, this is bad, to what could happen. And it's when you start talking about that, like, I mean, we're on San Francisco is as far as you can get from New York in this instance, but it instantly became, oh, I heard they're targeting schools. I heard that they're targeting the coast. I heard that they're targeting this. And it's like, for me growing up in San Francisco, like the Blue Angels are a thing, and it was around that time. So like there'd be a whole bunch of like planes flying by, and then all of a sudden the planes stopped for a while. But for months after that, there was so much fear of what might happen, what could happen, that it really starts making you think. I'm like, well, I live very close to the Golden Gate Bridge, and that seems like something that terrorists would attack, you know, based on movies.
Because every movie,
But you get what I'm saying? It's like that feels so much of a bigger deal, and all of a sudden it's like, when you stop thinking about like, oh, what does New York have to do with me? And you start thinking, how could this relate to me? It's like, that's the moment when it gets extremely scary, especially when you're a little kid.
Yeah.
But I mean, things got nasty that day. Like I remember like the racism that started happening instantly once it was just like, it's this group, fuck these people. And like, it just started like going from that. And like, again, being so young, that was one of my first instances of like, oh shit, we're mad at a group of people. Because a group of people did something, even though my friend who I'm with right now is part of those people, you know, and that was part of the whole thing about being kicked out of people's houses. Like they were scared, you know, and it was just like, I have never experienced that level of fear among so many people. And I don't think anyone else has. Like that was such a unique experience for our lifetime.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I remember ending the day at Mel's Diner. And
Good choice.
they made a big thing of like, we're going to be open.
They're
Like, if people wanna
24/7,
come,
right?
like
That's
we're
their whole
sticking
shtick.
through this and like whatever. And I just remember everyone being there, it being a really surreal experience of everyone talking and like really kind of like educating the kids, like talking to the kids of like, this is a scary situation. You should feel scared right now. And like that really opened my eyes to a whole bunch of shit. And then I remember the next day going to school and like, it was like in English class, it was like, just all you're going to do is just write about how you feel about yesterday.
Did you save it?
And oh yeah, I got all that stuff.
Yeah.
My 7th grade English teacher, Mr. Fleming, was one of the best teachers I ever had. Saved all of our journal shit and 10 years later mailed it back to all of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So I was really,
cool of him.
really dope. But anyways, that's my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it was weird. Yesterday on Reddit, somebody put up on one of the AMA threads where that got voted at the top was just like, not AMA, I guess, but whatever, of what was it like to travel in airports before 9/11? I was like, Jesus Christ, I forget people don't.
I would
there's
never know.
So many people that just don't know what the world was like after.
Dude,
before
I can
that.
tell you story because my mom was an executive at an airline
Yeah.
in the late 80s and early 90s. And I used to hang out at Logan Airport all the time, Boston, which we're going to be at in a pack season. I used to just walk around there. Like they made me a fake, like I'm a like 6-year-old kid or whatever. They made me one of those fake armbands, but like with a real ID. Like I used to like, I used to like
start of a movie, by the way.
I used to just walk like wherever I wanted. I used to just because people like knew it. Like it was just totally lax.
Nobody
Like it
knew
was
it was
totally
a kid.
insane. Like I think back on those days. My mom and I have reflected on it where I was like, you know, because my mom started in the late 80s as a flight attendant and ended up working her way all the way up to like being in charge of like this group of flight attendants and sitting in an office instead of flying around. So I used to go hang out with her, and like in her office and stuff like that. Which was
Sorry, did you say Betty Ann was a flight attendant?
yeah.
All right.
And
Just double check
actually,
on
my
that.
parents' license plates back in the day were Firefly 1 and Firefly 2, which I loved.
That's awesome.
And like my mom was Firefly 1 and my dad was Firefly 2. Yeah, so I used to like at Logan Airport. I have these crazy memories where I'm like, I would have gotten shot
Oh yeah.
if I even tried to do anything like I was doing when I was 6 or 7 today, because I was like going into the where the mechanics hung out. I was going into the like near the tarmac, into the hangars, and like they all knew me. It wasn't like I was just some random person, but it was like you would never ever. I don't take that for granted because I'm like I had really interesting experiences as a kid being around airlines in the pre 9/11 world. I remember being like, I used to like fuck around with the computers that would like tell you the weather and all that kind of stuff. And like you, I
the
know
weather. Rerouting
I have this,
flights.
I have this like mathematical memory or something of all of the 3 digit. Like I used to just, you go to these computers, they were like not even 386s, they were ancient. That were like, all they did was give you weather information. All you had to do was type in 3 letters and then hit enter, and it would show you like all the real time weather information for like whatever you are. And that's how I learned all these random ass codes of like how, why, you know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, so the days of those airports are long gone, and you know the real ramifications. I mean to I guess close out or bring it back is like, I remember at the time the conspiracy seemed way bigger than it was, which was one of the things that scared everyone in the days and weeks following. The conspiracy wasn't nearly as big as it seemed like it was going to be.
Right, but you also heard about like stuff at the Pentagon, all that stuff. Like there was, you were like,
Shanksville.
what's happening? How
Right,
many
but
planes are
we didn't
there?
know if it was like going to be multi-day, like if they had other ways. You know, Shanksville obviously was shot down by I mean I think it's pretty obvious.
Obviously.
I think it's pretty obvious that Shanksville was shot down. But whatever story they want to tell about that is fine. But there was a lot of implications from that day because the military completely failed. The intelligence services completely failed. They weren't able to scramble any jets until 3 of them are already like it was. And then I remember being outside because I lived on, obviously I lived on very close to the beach on Long Island. It's impossible not to. And I remember looking up in the days after, fucking hornets and raptors just buzzing the coast all over and over again. I'm like, where was everybody when we needed to scramble these things? Like everyone was asleep at the switch. And then the other thing I remember, and that is exactly what happened. I don't give a fuck what anyone says. Like the CIA and the FBI and the military were asleep at the fucking switch. Everyone. The second thing that was, and I don't think they'll ever be asleep at the switch again because of it, but the second thing was that knowing a little bit of history, I'm like, we are going to have a draft. Like I remember being like,
yeah.
And I'm 17, I'm like, great. So I remember thinking that in the weeks and months after, I'm like, the big wars we fought in the past have all ubiquitously been draft focused. This was actually the first time we fought a big war without a draft. Vietnam had a massive, obviously we all know that our parents were involved in a massive draft. My dad was in the Air Force during Vietnam. Korea had a massive draft. World War II had a massive draft. World War I had a massive draft. The Civil War obviously had a massive draft. So I was like, well, I'm primed for the picking now.
Yeah, but I remember my aunt calling me on 9/11 when I think we were trying to organize to go to the blood bank before they were turning people away. Like, there's nowhere for this blood to go. Don't go. And then she was like, do not join the army today. Like, I understand you're probably feeling that. Don't do it. You know what I mean? Don't run off and join the military.
Yeah, a lot of mistakes were made that day. And then the implications of 9/11 beyond that is like, it is a different world. And I do remember the world before 9/11. I was 16, 17 years old. I remember very well. And the erosion of rights and all those kinds of things that we've let happen through fear and the racism and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you want to talk about racism, dude. I mean, coming to New York in October and November 2001, you ain't fucking seen racism. Like I remember it being so open, like amongst people I knew and people in school and people even on TV, and not exactly a backwoods place in the South, like we were the target. But I remember I was like, I remember being like, this is insane. Like even for me, I was like, it's kind of crazy what's going on here. The way people are talking, the way my friends' parents were talking, the way kids were talking in school, the way, I was like, Jesus Christ. I had no idea. It was maybe bubbling under the surface for a long time for New Yorkers because of 1993. And then USS Cole happened. Everyone forgets that there was a prelude to 9/11, which was the USS Cole bombing in 2000, when Al Qaeda ran a speedboat into a USS destroyer. Killing like 70 people, whatever. That was really the prelude to it. But people also forget that the World Trade Center was the target before, as you mentioned. So I think that might have been always bubbling under the surface. Also, New York is just an extremely racist place, depending on where you go in New York City. When you have this confluence, an unrivaled confluence of every fucking person in the world that you won't see in any other city in the world, really. That's to be expected. I guess it's not excusable, whatever. But I that's one of my memories too. Was like this. It wasn't even under the surface at all.
Yeah.
Like it was just out there.
And the thing about what I was talking about with the fear and all of that, like before on the show, one of my topics was like videos that just make you feel good, where it's just like the blind person seeing for the first time, or like families reuniting and all that. Like there's this a 9/11 video that surfaced a couple years ago of someone with a camcorder from like blocks away.
The kids,
they're
like, college
they're,
kids, up in the apartment,
freshmen and college kids, and they just have a camcorder, and like someone just starts filming and freaking the fuck out, and it's just like two people in their room, and then like they look out the window and they see shit happening, and then they see the second thing hit and explodes, and they freak the fuck out, and they're just crying. They run to the elevator, and it's just like an elevator full of people that are all just fucking scared, and it's just like watching that, it is just overwhelming, where I'm just like, holy crap, like there's no fear is never encapsulated in a moment more than that, because it's so genuine, and they're right fucking there.
I think the touchstone's interesting too for us as Americans, that we've often taught. I mean, it's just I think like Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about this and stuff like that. Like we are so insulated from the rest of the world that like when we're attacked or fucked with in some way, it's actually a big deal. Like we don't have we couldn't like rouse our grandparents. If for instance, if that happened in London, there would have been old people been like, it's a terrible thing, but like the Nazis bombed us nearly into submission for years. It's okay. Right. Much more formidable enemy. We withstood and we'll get through it. But for our experience was like we've only been attacked on our soil a handful of times and we never had a foreign army on our soil since 1814. You know, like it's and when Pearl Harbor was bombed, it wasn't even a state, which is lost on everyone. It was actually like this far-flung territory. We didn't even really give a fuck about Hawaii, you know. So it wasn't like seeing something like that happen. I think it was also a very interesting moment for everyone, where it was like we didn't know exactly how to respond to it, because no one generationally above us even could be like, well, this is the other touchstone when this happened in the past. It actually never happened to us. And so I think it caused a certain kind of reaction.
It's an interesting tie back to what I've said before in our political discussions, right? In the way that, not that I wish that, but like I think that the country's so fucked right now, and the only way to bring it together is something. And I always talk about 9/11 being something that united America in a way I had never seen in my 18 years and haven't seen since. I mean, since we started drifting away from it. But that was the thing. I mean, like we talk about it in joking fashions, but I don't know how much you know, but like, granted, I'm from Chicago, but every other state and city really fucking hated New York. You know what I mean? Like, they were just fucking chips on their shoulders, this, that, the other. Everything's amazing, blah, blah, blah. But it's like when somebody picks on your little brother, like, whoa, only we can pick on them. And I don't mean murder people, but you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing of like, suddenly it was America. Like, there wasn't like this kind of thing, that kind of thing. Suddenly I knew what the World Trade Center was. I knew the layout of Manhattan. I knew how this would, blah, blah, blah. I'll never forget when, after, New York matters in a way it didn't matter. I mean, because like I'm a Ghostbusters fan, right? So that's like my introduction to New York as a kid, and like, a little bit about it that way or there. But then to have 9/11 happen and know so much about it and follow so much and understand relation of Times Square to this to that, blah, blah, blah. To the first time I ever went to, I don't even remember what event it was for IGN in New York, though. They put me up at a hotel that was, it turned out, I got up there and I opened my drapes. I'm like, well, I'm really close to Ground Zero. And I opened my drapes and I looked down on Ground Zero, like where they were still building. It was still like totally obviously decimated way after this is 2008 probably to 2001, but still just holes in the ground with people working night and day on it and stuff. And it was like, to see the scope of that, to see the size of that, to finally understand that, to grasp what it was like, wow, like, this is still like America changed that day in so many ways, but in terms of us all being one thing, which is why it's all fucked up how it is now that we're all so torn apart or whatever.
The weird full circle for my dad, by the way, is that my dad was an iron worker that worked on the Twin Towers.
That's crazy.
So because my dad was an iron worker before he was a fireman. So, and they went up in the 70s. So the one thing I'll never forget about the towers, I've been there. I've been to them. I was there several times, is they were really massive, as everyone knows. They were really huge. Yeah. And I remember, I think I talked about this in a conversation with Colin, but looking up, and they were so big that it looked like they were actually like going that way.
Like towering over.
Like actually going forward. They were really like, you watch like, for some reason 89 TMNT is always my touchstone for this, but like watch any old night.
Oh, no, I just watch Trading Places, and that's where they go. Because they don't walk into isn't that where the New York Stock Exchange used to be, or no?
No, that's Wall Street. But
that's one of the craziest things about it. To back up your point before you get into 89 thing, is the fact of like, again, not for, and it'll never be like this for anyone again, but like for once they went down and you realize they were a thing, I saw them everywhere. And I remember going back and watching Ghostbusters and like, are these things? Oh, there they are. I never saw them or noticed them. They were just a skyline. I never knew what they were. Sorry.
No, that's what I was saying, is that like they're noticeable, and I remember people even scrubbing them out. And
Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I read I was watching Trading Places, and I think they walk into they at least use the exteriors as they're walking to the Twin Towers. I think they were supposed to go into the stock exchange, that's why I was confused. But I like to read the trivia on IMDb, and I guess on certain plane versions, there's a line where he's like, Eddie Murphy's being walked in by Dan Aykroyd, and he's like, don't take any shit from anyone in here. Like, if it's kill or be killed in here, and I guess they take that line out just out of respect for everyone that died that day.
Yeah, I think the overcompensation for 9/11 is a little much, and I say that as someone who knew people that died that day. Like, I remember I've talked about Jimmy Eat World's record "Bleed American" was recalled, and the name of the album was no longer "Bleed American" because they wanted to offend, because everyone was offended. Everyone was very sensitive after 9/11 to the utmost degree. So it's like, I don't know that, if we have, the fact of the matter is something like that's probably going to happen to us again. And it could be way worse, and it could be way more tragic, like a dirty bomb or something like that. Which I'm actually shocked that nothing's happened since then. Like, and it's to the credit of the FBI and the CIA and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, it is a little strange to me that like nothing has happened, and it makes you wonder if these people are very calculating, smart. They're not stupid. The people that coordinated the attack on 9/11 are fucking really smart people. I hate when they're dismissed as being like these barbaric backwoods Afghanis. Well, they're actually mostly Saudis and stuff, but like these people from a very archaic part of the world or whatever. I'm like, these guys outsmarted everyone in the American apparatus. So I'm not so sure how stupid they are. you know, and that's the kind of the wily ass shit that they're able to do is what scares you, because you like, first of all, New York is always going to be the target, always, and everyone knows that, which is why it's like fucking a lot. Go to JFK, as you guys have been, and watch as everyone walks around with assault rifles. You don't really see that very commonly. You know, go into the subway or on the Long Island Railroad or any of those kinds of things, and the people are armed to the fucking teeth because they know where you know, and these guys know their targets, and it's scary. It actually just tied back to Jericho. In the show Jericho that I love, there's 25 nuclear bombs that go off in the United States. There's only 23 of them end up being detonated. One of them is held by Hawkins, but in the story, New York City is so prepared for looking for terrorism from 9/11 that the bomb in New York City is found before it goes off, but the rest of the country's destroyed. So people have played with it in clever ways, I guess. Yeah. But it is scary to know that we are going to be attacked again. It's not a matter of if, you know. So we'll see how we deal with it that time.
Yeah.